Hello, everybody. Sorry, we starting a little bit late. We had our first panel of the day. It was a presentation of all the 18 projects, run a little bit long, and so my apologies on that one. But we are very excited to kick off this one. Thank you all so much for being here. I am gonna go ahead and pull up everybody's bios, and we're gonna kick things off here. So we'll just give it a second for everybody to join. Looks like we are waiting for just a few people. Um, Here we go. All right. Thank you all so much for being here. Very excited about this discussion. Um, so my name is Mike, and I work as a writer and a researcher for creative startups, and we are the contractors working with the EDD to come up with a strategic plan for the new creative industries division. And as we've been doing this work, we've been talking to folks in state government and sort of meeting and discovering that there are some really wonderful, passionate advocates for the creative economy who have been doing this work for a while, even before the Creative Industries Division existed. So we're very excited to sort of gather them here this evening and have a little discussion about how just sort of what's been already happening and how folks can continue to work together. And I'm going to start out I think we've got everybody's bios here. So I'm going to start out by introducing our host, who we sort of in our interview together had this idea for this panel, and we thought that, this would be a really good idea. And that's Dr. Patricia Trujillo. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Trujillo. So Dr. Patricia Trujillo is the Deputy Secretary of the New Mexico Higher Education Department. And during her time at the New Mexico Higher Education Department, New Mexico passed the Opportunity Scholarship Act, creating the nation's first tuition-free college program, established the country's largest higher education trust fund, prioritized funding for student basic needs, and championed college equity and access statewide. So prior to the appointment at the Higher Education Department, Dr. Trujillo was a faculty member in the Department of Languages and Letters for over a decade at Northern New Mexico College, and the founding director of the Office of Equity and Diversity. And she taught primarily writing and literature courses and was the creative writing editor for the Journal of Chicana Latina Studies from 2016 to 2021. So welcome, Dr. Trujillo. Yeah, do you want to kick us off a little bit and sort of tell us a little bit about yourself and your advocacy, and then we'll sort of roll into the other panelists, and then we'll launch the larger discussion.
Sure. Thank you so much for that great introduction, Mike. And Mike is being humble. We had some really great conversations in lead up to this panel that were really exciting. And so we're glad to share them here with you today. I will just briefly say that in my role with the agency, the ways that we have been advocating for the creative industries, creative economy, of course, is through our tuition-free college programs, the New Mexico Opportunity Scholarship and the New Mexico Lottery Scholarship, which is the most robust tuition-free college program in the nation. And the interesting part about that is that during several conversations while we were advocating for the New Mexico Opportunity Scholarship, we specifically had some conversations about whether or not different arts and fine arts should be covered by it, because in some conversations, right, there was the erroneous sense that fine arts should not be valued. Fine arts degrees should not be valued in the same way as other degrees. And of course, Secretary Rodriguez and I did not concur, nor did the majority of folks who were working on the policy. But it does remind us, right, that some folks have those perspectives, and so that the continued advocacy and these kinds of conversations where we're really talking about the robust creative economy that exists in New Mexico and how we can continue to build it are important. Something else to note is that our tuition-free college programs cover certificates, associates, all the way up to bachelor's degrees. And so there are many ways to enter into the arts economy. So for instance, if you want to be a welder, I've heard some very beautiful stories about people who go on to work, sets at the opera or in other creative spaces, to looking at academic programs, right? Bachelor's of Fine Arts and bachelor's programs in many areas of studies. Many of our campuses have small business development centers across the state. So if you're an artist, you can go through 6 to 8 week courses to set up your LLC or a business around your programming. And in addition, I would just like to mention that many of our campuses have business incubators, as well as creative incubation spaces where people can work on their projects and on their craft. And in general, HEIs provide spaces for students and for communities to participate in creative economy and create and hone their craft, right, in their creative endeavors. And so I will stop now, but I'll add a little bit more about that idea of how HEIs really are at the heart of creative endeavors in any given state, but especially in New Mexico.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much. And yeah, we're very excited. Education, huge part of this, and we've seen that in our research as well. And speaking of education, rolling along alphabetically by last name, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce Breezy Gutierrez, the director of College and Career Readiness Bureau for the Public Education Department. And Ms. Gutierrez oversees initiatives for secondary schools, such as career technical education, graduation requirements, dual credit, etc. And she is a dedicated educator with 15 years experience as a teacher, librarian, advisor, coach, and administrator in New Mexico schools. So she's done it all. She's seen it all, and I'm very excited to welcome her here today and to have her speak a little bit about the public education department's work with the creative economy and just, thoughts about advocacy there. So welcome, Breezy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. So, okay, so let me, so the public education department, so I am the director of the College and Career Readiness Bureau. And so anything, again, that has to do with secondary education, including career technical education. And so thinking about public education and contributing to the Creative Industries Initiative, I think some of the things that we can contribute to that is, fostering a strong foundation for arts education, promoting those creative skills, and integrating technology and innovation into the curriculum. So some of those ways that we are currently doing that is through career technical education. So we have arts, audio, video, technology, and communications programs of study that really relate to specific programs such as set design and construction, media production, computer graphics, careers in performing arts, and mass communications. In addition, some of these career clusters that we have, so we have 16 career clusters, they kind of overlap with each other. So the business portion overlaps with this too as well, because we have programs of study with entrepreneurship, which helps students really understand what it is to open a small business, right? Regardless of what the content or the topic is in their specific small business. We do a lot of things with incorporating arts education into these two curriculums. Some of the other things that we contribute are teacher training and professional development, access to resource and facilities, partnerships with creative professionals and organizations. So for example, we really support Film Prize Junior, and we had over 167 small short films submitted this year by over 84 different schools. And so that was, it was great to see what kind of short films that the schools created. In addition, we support career technical student organizations, and one of those career technical student organizations, Business Professionals of America. I personally have seen students create computer graphics, animations, short films, put together business plans, and really support the creative processes when it comes to those being creative with art. Those extracurricular programs and clubs we really support, technology integration, and then career pathways and that vocational training. So those are all the different ways that the public education department can help support an initiative such as this.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I think that yeah, it's interesting to sort of to think about the pathway from like those programs to some of the programs that Dr. Trujillo was talking about, and thinking about that lifelong learning kind of path into the creative industries and what currently exists. I think that's pretty exciting for people to learn more about, and to think about how the Creative Industries Division can sort of help support that work. Next up, we've got our sort of fearless overseer of this study from the Economic Development Department, and very exciting. Excited to welcome her to this panel. She just got done hosting the last panel, and that is Shani Harvie, who is the Director of Diversity, Justice, Equity, and Inclusion for the Economic Development Department. You might be a coordinator. I might have just accidentally promoted you to director of those things, but you know, it's a good day to get promoted. And yeah, Shani is a musician and an advocate for the creative economy in many facets of her life. And so very excited to welcome her today, and to have her talk a little bit about I mean, I guess the EDD is pretty is gonna be the department where this Creative Industries Division lives. So to sort of hear a little bit about the outreach and plans for the EDD to collaborate with other agencies across the government.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I will take the Jedi promotion. That's totally fine for me. It was really fun and really incredible to kind of see this legislation come through, and then see all the things and all the agencies that are going to have to be kind of intrinsically linked for this to work, and getting to watch all these projects come together. So, you know, I think for EDD, one of the biggest kind of excitements around creative industries, at least from my perspective, is that we have this opportunity to really promote it and tout it as an economic driver. I think historically, when we think about artists and we think about creative endeavors, and we think about, you know, we get the starving artist archetype, and we, you know, just like the sponsors did such a good job kind of casting the net really, really wide, that we have fine arts all the way down to digital media and marketing and crafts and culinary, architecture, learning, digital design and media, museums. It's just a really wide opportunity that New Mexico, I think, has some really incredible strengths that we'll have the opportunity to capitalize on. And, you know, partnering with higher education and Department of Cultural Affairs, not Arts and Culture, which is City of Albuquerque, which I reversed a handful of times throughout this process. And I'm just like, arts and culture, culture and arts, it's one and all. But it's been kind of really great, because I think that there's things that we're going to have to do along every level of the creative industries process, whether that's looking at business formation and looking at the infrastructure that's going to be needed on the economic development side when you're thinking about, even if we're going to have to be doing some talking outside of even just higher education, DCA and public education department, like we might need to be talking to Department of Transportation or General Services around securing spaces to do these kinds of things. Working really closely with Department of Arts and Culture, of course, because I think that what'll be the most interesting thing to navigate is that line between economic development, infrastructure, and industry, and kind of the arts and cultural heritage preservation that Department of Arts and Culture focuses on, and where we'll be able to really partner and also still have very kind of like defined roles and responsibilities, maybe, as opposed to so I've been thinking about this a lot, because there's so much help that artists need, all the way from back through education, where you see charter schools like the New Mexico School for the Arts, short shout out just because I went there for high school, prepping students to get into the secondary educational system around their arts, and then also working on the economic development and Department of Workforce side to build what that's going to look like in terms of workforce. And I think it's just been a remarkable journey, and it's going to be really incredible for all the creatives across the state to see that they're recognized in the New Mexico economy as these like folks who are big drivers of what we're doing, and of the future of New Mexico, and the future of even how states and communities have to operate, because we're going to have to shift, right? And we're looking for new ways to grow and expand. And I think the Creative Industries Division is a really fascinating way for New Mexico to be able to do that. Also, just because of how many different arts folks we have already here, and even talking with other legislators, that it's funny, when I talk about music is kind of like my thing, where I can take off the state government hat and kind of have that thing that brings me balance. And the truth is that everyone needs that creative outlet, no matter if it's pottery or spoken word or doing painting or wanting to build something, everyone has that in them. I know a lot of people don't see themselves maybe as creatives or as artists, but the truth is that if you talk to me about whatever your skill or kind of experience is in, I can I can find a connection for you on how and why that's art too. So I think it'll just be a really great journey, and a really good opportunity for our economy and for people to participate in advance in ways that maybe they didn't see before, or pathways that are just starting to now be uncovered. Did I answer the question, Mike?
I think so. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, thank you so much. Yeah. And I think that, yeah, it is sort of interesting how much this this theme of education is just sort of woven throughout all of this. And even back to like what you were saying, Shani, just sort of the education or the narrative, the storytelling about the creative industries as an economic driver, and how many of folks in the creative industries also sort of have this background in education, and that goes for our next speaker as well, having a background in education. I'm very honored to have the Secretary of the Indian Affairs Department, Josett Monette, here with us. Secretary Monette is a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians. She currently serves as the Cabinet Secretary for the New Mexico Indian Affairs Department. She is a licensed attorney and graduate of UNM School of Law. Prior to joining IAD, Josett was the New Mexico Legal Aid Native American Program Director. And Josett's first career was as a teacher, working in education mostly on her home reservation in the Turtle Mountain community. The IAD's vision is that tribal nations, tribal communities, and indigenous people are happy, healthy, and prosperous, and that traditional ways of life are honored, valued, and respected. So we're very excited. I have messed up the alphabet. I'm sorry. I realized it halfway through. but does not diminish my excitement for either Secretary Monette or our final exciting speaker who shall be revealed after Secretary Monette. So thank you very much, Secretary Monette, for joining us here this afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Yes. So I am going to thank you for having us this evening. I'm saying us, and you can't, I don't know if you can see, I was trying to figure out how to get him in the frame with me. This is Ray Tafoya. He is our government policy legislative director at the Indian Affairs Department. And so I'm going to defer to him to give a little bit of background and answer some of the questions. That's okay, and then I can pop in afterwards.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you all for joining. Yeah, so Secretary and I were talking about this and how Indian Affairs can kind of pitch in to help out and what some of the things we look for from the new division. And I think one of the things, I certainly appreciate a lot of the words that are coming out about education and teaching art forms in the varying different art forms. But I think looking at it from the perspective of kind of Native communities, I think what we would look for and what we would help to promote is creating more of a market space for these non-traditional art forms. If you really look at forums like the Santa Fe Indian Market or the Santa Fe Portal program, or even in Indian Pueblo Cultural Center, their market space that they have and that they promote is really more traditional Native arts, and doesn't necessarily include a lot of the art forms that were mentioned, your film, your fashion, your graphic design. A lot of these art forms are being entered into by Native Americans, and they're not necessarily traditional forms of art. And so looking for a space where these artists can go have an outlet, have a marketplace to put their art up for sale and possibly may turn it into a business. And so taking it that next step after the education, once they've learned the art form, once they've perfected it, now they want to start putting their wares up for sale, and reaching a broader audience. I think that's really where we want to come in and help to promote, is really that marketplace where they can start to promote their art and they start to showcase it a little bit more.
Yeah. So, and just to add on to that, so I think I was having, sorry, this is weird. But I was having a discussion. I just did a podcast interview earlier today, and we were talking about kind of financial literacy and for Indian country and such. And one of the things that we talked about on there was in particular for artists, et cetera, for Native artists, and really helping artists understand how to build up their businesses and where they can go to look for resources and what they can do. And so one of the conversations I was having today is that IED doesn't necessarily have that right now, but it was like, that's a really good place for us to look at. And one of the things that IED is really good at is connecting, I think, we're really good at is connecting people with resources. And so having this division start up, it's a place, it's another avenue for people to connect with IED and say, hey, this is the type of work that I'm doing. Here's some things. Do you have resources? And we can say, yes, we can connect you with our state partners and we can figure out how to help artists move further along. One of those things that I have a friend who's an attorney, who's also an artist, and he took some time off from being an attorney earlier today too, to work on his art. And one of the things he mentioned was, he's like, I'm not sure that all these artists know really how to run their business. They know how to do it for themselves, but they could really be expanding, like reading that contract and making sure they're getting what they should be asking for and getting a return, and really like learning how to expand their businesses out or using social media or whatever platforms are available to them. So I think those are ways that IED can work with the division to really figure out how we can best help in particular Native artists in growing those businesses.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you both. And yeah, it's he like keeps like coming in and out of the shadows. It's the nature of this like virtual background, technology that we're in. And it's really interesting that what you were saying about sort of scaling up and thinking about protections for artists and the reason it's interesting is it dovetails with a panel we're doing on Friday with our last speaker here, Michelle Laflamme Childs, who is the director of New Mexico Arts. And on Friday at 2 p.m., we've got the landscape of business thinking and advocacy for artists and creatives with Michelle, with Henry Jake Foreman from New Mexico Community Capital, Max Haas from who is an entertainment and IP lawyer who specializes in AI and all that, and Lori Roof from Creative New Mexico. And that'll sort of just to sort of paint the picture of the way all these topics are sort of interconnecting, and to sort of launch this discussion and talk about the collaboration and honestly all the amazing work that's been happening for years and years. We're very excited to have this late afternoon with us, Michelle Laflamme Childs, who again is the executive director of New Mexico Arts in the Department of Cultural Affairs. And the New Mexico Arts is New Mexico's federally authorized state arts agency. And Michelle has 18 years of experience in arts administration in both the nonprofit and public sector, and over a decade of experience as a marketing professional in the for-profit sector. So she's seen every angle of this world. And New Mexico Arts supports the creative economy through grants to nonprofit organizations and local government and public educational institutions for arts and cultural programs serving the public, through the public art program by purchasing artworks from artists and galleries, and by providing technical assistance and educational and professional development opportunities to organizations, artists, and arts educators throughout New Mexico. So very excited to welcome Michelle Laflamme Childs with us this evening.
Thank you so much, Mike. And honestly, I'm really quite honored and flabbergasted to be amongst these folks. So thank you for inviting me to be part of this. Yeah, New Mexico Arts has been supporting essentially the creative economy for almost 60 years. We were established in 1965, right after the creation of the National Endowment for the Arts. As were most state arts agencies, some already existed and were repurposed, but many of us were created at that time to distribute federal funds, arts funds from the NEA to the states. There are 56 of us across the country, 50 states and 6 US jurisdictions. And that is our primary purpose. And over the years, that has definitely has grown. In 1986, the statute was created for art in public places, which is a % for art program, which this fiscal year, we may end up with $2 million in art purchases, which is pretty massive. We grant about $1 million a year to between 175 and 200 arts organizations. They're not large grants, but they have a massive return on investment. I was just pulling together some numbers before this conversation to be able to talk about the value of the nonprofit arts sector in the creative economy. Since 2019, if you go through 2022, I didn't have 23 data at the time this was put together, but our about $4 million investment in the nonprofit sector in New Mexico leveraged about $141 million in nonprofit arts organization spending. So we have not been part of the larger conversation around creative industries. We, for whatever reason, are involved in this conversation very late in the game, but we have been doing this work for a very long time and are super excited about the possibility of what the future could look like. And we have been touting the value of public support for the arts, which is also public support for the creative economy. Is that the AEP 6? I have a whole bunch of stats for that ready for whenever anybody has questions. So I'm good. Because that study is not great out of context. It's a lot of data that needs a little bit of explaining, in my opinion. So I'm happy to talk about that data, but that data definitely, it's a nonprofit study. And we in New Mexico participated. It was a national study, but it basically busts the myth that nonprofit arts organizations suck resources, but they also provide a tremendous economic boost to local economy. And I can talk about that later too. I don't want to take up too much time, plus I need a sip of water. There's a whole lot to talk about. We do a whole lot of things that relate to the creative economy. We provide professional training for artists for exactly the kinds of things you all have been talking about. We have an artist apprentice master program, very small, funded by the federal government, but it helps keep sort of traditional practices, folk practices that are happening in the state going, so that people can, and there are people who have made careers from those apprenticeships over time. We pump, you talked about education. We put about $150,000 a year in grants specifically into education, arts education programming. And thank you all. My daughter is a benefit of the Opportunity Scholarship at NMSU as an art major. So it's an amazing place to be in New Mexico, to be in the arts. So not only am I honored to be on this panel, but I am honored to have my job and privileged to do the work that I do and to do it with people like you.
That's wonderful. And I know that when Dr. Trujillo and I were talking and coming up with this idea, yeah, I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like we talked about how there's this sense that like there's people who are just really passionate about this, but sometimes feel like, you know, just with the everyday navigation and all the tasks and feeling very overwhelmed, that there's not as many opportunities as there should be to sort of connect with other people and figure out how to collaborate together. So yeah, it is really awesome to see everybody come together. And I feel like we've heard some really good ideas. Time is a very strange thing. It just floats away. And we're looking at 5:14 right now. And so, yeah, I think we've heard some great ideas from folks about how they want to collaborate with each other. And I want to make sure that we sort of open it up. If there are people in the chat who have any questions, you know, here's a good opportunity. We've got some really wonderful, esteemed folks from across state government here, sort of ready to talk about how their departments and divisions are already and are continuing to and planning to do even more sort of spurring of the creative industry. And so if you have any questions, that Q&A is right down there. We've got one question about emphasis on teen literacy and being able to partner with educators to encourage reading and having teens tell their own stories. So maybe I'll set that question up maybe for Breezy as Public Education Department. What programs out there might already exist to sort of connect writers, artists with sort of teen literacy? Or I know that literacy itself is like a big topic, right, in New Mexico right now. So maybe that would be something to sort of throw to you.
So for the past 3 years, our office has utilized funding to support initiatives, a pilot called Innovation Zones. And so through these Innovation Zones, what we are trying to do is trying to collect what schools are doing that is really innovative, that is supporting specific things within their community too as well, right? So some of the components of the Innovation Zones are what career technical education programs such as these arts in AV, business, entrepreneurship, marketing, and so forth. I'm just trying to think about the programs that really support these initiatives that kind of cross collaborate. It's not just one program of study, they kind of cross each other. In addition to work-based learning, how are we getting kids out there to really focus on the passion and what they want to do, and kind of, you know, get them out into the workforce and see what it looks like before they actually really have to get out into the workforce, right? Kind of like an earn while you learn too kind of thing, to assist with their families and students having opportunities instead of having to get an after school job, or really focusing on those extracurricular activities that are available during school time. In addition to that, we have the other component of that is a capstone project. And so what the capstone project is supposed to be is the students are really looking at their communities, seeing what needs to be fixed or improved on or brought up to another level, and really focusing on being a part of that community. Some of the initiative to that too as well is creating councils where the youth has a voice. We have to start listening to students. We have to start listening to what they want to do. So the Innovation Zones initiative is really looking at what schools are doing to do school differently, not just sitting in a classroom, you know, throwing information at kids and expecting them to just, you know, retain that information and then regurgitate it back, right? So what are we doing to make school more engaging, more relevant, and applicable to really what they want to do? So that also supports different components of literacy and so forth. So when Josett was talking, she said something about financial literacy. So one of those, that's in our wheelhouse too, right? So we see all people in the state of New Mexico before they become adults. So the public school sees all of these students. This is the time to really catch them, get them engaged, give them those opportunities in order for them to create those pathways and understand what the pipeline looks like going from cradle to career, right? It's not even just secondary to post-secondary. It's what career exploration are students really engaging with? Me as a librarian, that's another thing that we need to look at. Department of Cultural Affairs, libraries and museums are part of that. And that is a huge component of the resources that we can tap into to utilize. You know, you have librarians who are educators, they are program specialists, they have degrees, they can do multiple things. In addition, I remember going to Colorado to a conference, and in Colorado, they talked about how having, you know, gallery events and these art events help improve the economy, because
Right.
what it does is people, you know, they go to these events and then they go and they eat afterwards, right? So those are some of the things that they do to contribute to the economic development, and nobody sees that. So when Josett was talking, I was thinking about how the collaboration between us needs to happen when something so small, like if you make that small change, how it affects the rest of us. And we don't realize that until after, right? And so, for example, I'll take our graduation requirements. When graduation requirements just were passed in House Bill 171, there were some components to it saying, you know, you can substitute work-based learning for a math, you can substitute it for a social studies, you can substitute it for an English language arts or a science. Well, I can't make that decision alone. I had to really think, I sit down and think, who is it going to affect? So I had to bring in the Math and Science Bureau and say, what does this look like? How does it affect you? Then I had to bring in the Literacy and Humanities Department and say, what does this look like? How does this affect you? And how can we align it to make sure that it's high quality and high standards, and students are meeting those standards if they are engaged in some sort of work-based learning initiative? So,
Yeah.
just a little background on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful. And I encourage everybody attending to reach out to everybody here and follow up. We got a few questions about money, initiatives to help creatives make money, and making art funding directly available to individuals. I want to quickly, a somewhat easier question to answer comes from Cecilia Vargas, which is there some way to have digital space to list and connect creatives with each other? And so I want to shout out the EDD's resource map, which will be sort of presenting on Saturday for the working folks out there, try to do it outside of the work week. And that's a new cool digital space to connect creative businesses. But let me sort of throw it over to Shani and Michelle. And maybe we'll start with Shani because the Creative Industries Division is sort of the new kid on the block here. But I know that New Mexico Arts also has some really robust, this idea of direct funding for artists, and maybe how the Creative Industries Division and New Mexico Arts are going to sort of support each other, and we'll sort of hit that. Does that make sense?
Sure. I'll take a first swing at it. So in terms of at least the resource map, what we've been doing is trying to create kind of an online digital map where people can find the different resources and services that are available for their business, as well as partially for community. Part of the deliverables on the contract is looking at pulling all of those assets. So we'll get into that later, but I do believe that in building that platform, we've built in longevity, at least for the next 5 years. And there's some other stages as we develop that resource map where people might be able to actually connect on a back end. However, there's a lot of kind of legal stuff and things to get over when you kind of put a forum up, kind of a public wide open forum for people to connect with each other. So it might not be something that EDD can house itself, but it might be something where like maybe New Mexico Arts in conjunction, we might be able to partner in that way. And then I was going to speak briefly to some of the direct funding and kind of what these opportunities are going to look like. Part of the legislation did create a Creative Industries Division fund, which will look at doing grant making directly to I think through to doing grants, gifts, and donations. And it's kind of, that's where we have to kind of find the differences between what Creative Industries Economic Development is going to be working on versus like direct artist funding. Economic development is really going to be looking at job creation and infrastructure and organizations who are cultivating artists and industry in their area, as opposed to direct funding for creatives. And I think that there's some wiggle room in there in the legislation where it might be something we can consider at a later date. But in terms of like economic development impact, typically what the economic development department looks at is job creation, and kind of like capital expenditure, land building and infrastructure. And I think there's going to be a lot of discussion around some of the online events and Zooms going on over the next few days that will cover that. But part of what the Creative Industries Division will focus on is also pulling what those opportunities are for artists on a smaller level. So working in partnership with New Mexico Arts and Department of Arts and Culture, including also Department of Indian Affairs, higher education. I'm on a mailing list for some arts kind of cooperatives and foundations that send out like giant lists of different grant opportunities for artists. And some of those are focused on specific minority communities or underserved communities, and also just throughout a lot of different levels, including like youth in the arts, all the way up through people who might already own a creative business. So we'll be looking at doing like, partnerships and just making sure that we can get that information out. The Creative Industries Division itself probably won't have a giant pot of funding just as we're starting. It's something that we'll work to, and as we can show legislators what we've done and what this really means for the community, and the community is able to engage with their legislators to talk about why this funding is critical, we'll be able to expand that. But in the meantime, we'll be pulling what those opportunities are wherever we can find them, whether that's through West Staff organization and several others who do kind of focus on small grant making for creatives. Sorry, Michelle.
Yeah.
Thank you, Shani. Yeah, I think the last thing that Shani said right there is probably the most important, and that's going to be advocacy from the field, meaning all of y'all who aren't government employees, because that's not something we get to do, to be honest, at least at a state level, as executive employees. So the field's going to need to really make their voices very loud and very clear to the folks who hold the purse strings, which is the New Mexico State Legislature, how important this kind of funding is. So creative industries in their first year got a big chunk to do some stuff with, and then got almost nothing last year from the legislature. New Mexico Arts has seen a effective, if you account for inflation, 67% decrease in our grants funding over the last 20 years. So it is dire times. I mean, it's clear how important and how critical and how valuable the arts are to the economy, how important the creative economy is and the creative industries are. And so it's going to take some real pushing to get the legislature to recognize that and to decide to invest in these divisions. Honestly, the Department of Cultural Affairs as a whole, yes, but the department is a very large department, and most of it is museums and historic sites, state libraries and historic preservation, archaeology and administrative services. And we are the granting body that is funding the arts. We have to be singled out from that group, and we are funded independently in that we have our own bucket within cultural affairs. The division is separated out. And same thing with creative industries. In Colorado, it's pretty straightforward. In Colorado Creative Industries Division is both the State Arts Agency and the Creative Industries Division. Here we've split that in two. And so we've got to be clear with legislators. They both are going to need significant funding for us to make that kind of effect in the field. We don't fund individual artists at this point beyond our artist in residency program, which is only 2 artists a year, and the public art program. And some of that is because we don't even have enough money really to go around to the organizations. They're getting $5,000, $6,000 grants. You know, really, we'd like to be giving people $10,000, $20,000 grants, and we'd love to throw in some direct artist funding and direct artist granting too. But at the funding level we are now, we just can't add that to the pot. We just don't have enough money. So it's there. There's nothing that says we can't do it on paper. We just don't have the funds to do it.
Right. Yeah, and I also think that an important part of this, and something that you explained to me when we talked, Michelle, that I hadn't realized, and I think is good for the public to know, is the way the NEA funding works through the state arts agencies. And it's sort of, I mean, I might be saying this wrong, but it's sort of use it or lose it, right? Is that fair or is that wrong?
Actually the state's money is use it or lose it.
Oh, okay.
The NEA, 40% of the NEA's funding every year, the National Endowment for the Arts, 40% of their budget every year by law is allocated to the state and regional arts organizations. So state arts agencies like New Mexico Arts and regionals like Shani mentioned WestStaff, that's Western States Arts Federation. I'm actually on their board. And then the other regionals across the country. There are, I think, 6 total. So 40% of that money is coming to all of us. It's not competitive. It's based on an algorithm. We have to apply, but as long as you don't mess up the application, you will get your money. And then we channel that money out to the arts organizations. The NEA, though, is also, to be clear, they also have direct funding opportunities, and New Mexico needs to take better advantage of that. That's actually one of our goals, is to help the field recognize all of the opportunities that there are to apply for direct funding from the federal government, more than just the NEA, the NEH. I mean, there's lots of opportunities, but the state also does bring in a decent amount of money in NEA funds for direct grant applications that cultural institutions are making to the NEA.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that actually seems like a cool point of collaboration among all the agencies here, potentially around, because we started off talking so much about education and sort of exposing these opportunities to more people and sort of helping people. And like you mentioned, Breezy, like financial literacy, right? And couched in that is the idea of what opportunities are out there, what language brings you to those opportunities, right? Like how to speak the language of these funding that's available, right? And how we can all sort of collaborate to elevate individual New Mexico creatives. Let me throw it over, to Dr. Trujillo.
Well, I was going to say, just listening to all of my colleagues, I also feel very honored to be on this esteemed panel. One of the things we were asked to contemplate in preparation for this panel is if we had a magic wand, thinking about the new creative industries division and how we could work better with each other. I can't help but think that, every higher ed institution I've ever been a part of, if I can use an agroecological metaphor, is like a riparian zone of what is being taught in classrooms, right? Like it expands its impact, and that is very evident in the creative economy, especially around our bigger schools, our regional comprehensives. You see, like the shops popping up, you see different kinds of businesses, you have live music, right? You have art, different kinds of arts festivals. And that's really a place where we give students tools to empower their art and its power and how it gets amplified into the world. And one of the things that higher ed institutions can do is that they can help give communities leverage to help do things like apply for grants, right? So for the young person who asked the question about teen literacy, and I saw the second question about how do we bring more speakers to different cities across, New Mexico, and I can immediately think of the NEA Big Read. And I know that our librarian here in Santa Fe is doing a really great job of consistently applying for that grant. But how do we help share that information? And so with the new creative industries division, I would really love for us, to have almost a think tank to answer these questions more directly so that we're better able to leverage like the strengths of all of our different fields to be able to work with one another. Because, you kind of know your angle and your perspective of it from so I know it from higher ed. I would love for the young person to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat. And I would, that's because I study, North Central New Mexican literature, and I would love to tell you who those authors are and how we can reach out to them and how we can make them knowable to more folks and to amplify. But also, how do we do that as a state, right? We have New Mexico, I always say, is one of the most historically, if not, I can be a little biased, interesting places culturally, historically, socially. And the fact that we have this amazing arts market, but oftentimes it's framed from a perspective, like from the economic perspective of the arts market is for people who are from out of state who move here, as opposed to harnessing and really leveraging, supporting, and developing the talent from within the state as well. I think it has to be a both and proposition.
Yeah, Mike, can I speak to that? Or Michelle, you unmuted. I don't know if you have something.
Well, I wanted to say, outside Santa Fe too. We think of the Santa Fe is the third, depending on how you look at it, largest art market in the country, but that's really about spending money on art. Whereas when we look across the state as a whole, there's incredible art and culture happening in every single corner, in every single community of this state. And I think really taking advantage of and supporting all of it is really important. The focus does not need to be necessarily just in the capital city. There's so much happening across the state to pay attention to. And there was something else, but I forgot. So Shani, go for it.
Yeah, I think I'm like something I like to do is kind of like when I sit with business owners and they kind of have an end goal or they're coming in to ask me questions about how do they get this project completed, I like to think of all the different ways that something like this could happen. And just to speak a little bit to direct arts funding again, because the division itself will kind of look to serve both creative industries development and smaller entrepreneurs. In order for our artists to be eligible for direct funding when that time comes, it's going to be a conversation around whether or not they are set up as a business, whether or not they're registered and ready to walk through those programs. And in the JEDI program now, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for the Economic Development Department, that's a lot of what we look at is if we want to increase participation in our programs and JTIP and LEDA and make more grants and more funding, we have to meet business owners where they're at. And a lot of artists don't necessarily even see themselves as business owners at this point. So registration, GRT, all those things that can be a little bit daunting and overwhelming. We've got to get people excited for what's on the other side of that. And I think that working in conjunction with higher ed, public education, and seeing the financial literacy requirements that have come through the legislature as part of our educational requirements is going to be all these little pieces coming together to make sure that we can build a robust ecosystem or a robust landscape for economic development and for the arts and for education. Just seeing New Mexico almost rise, like we all have to be hand in hand doing this work so that when people move up, we all move up together. And then I was just kind of workshopping that question that came in around librarians and why there's not enough kind of authors in schools. And I think that there might be an opportunity between creative industries division, our maybe PED and higher ed, as well as Department of Arts and Culture, to look at even creating kind of like a matching program where if a public institution wants to put up a particular amount of funding to bring in an artist sometime in the year, we might be able to coordinate something like that where we can help either land additional federal dollars, which would probably be something going through the creative industries division, and also just creating a space where that can happen. Because I think that, you know, art in schools is one of the most, it's one of the most like critical things that you can do for youth to show them that there's more than what's going on. And I think that there's ways that we can make that happen. So when people see a gap in the market or in the industry, or this area is suffering, I think being able to bringing that to economic development, whether it's creative industries or whether it's small business regulatory advisory, because there's something where business owners and entrepreneurs are having a more difficult time, or students, we as a government entities and employees, we have to hear it from you all first, you all being the attendees and people who are going to be listening to this later. We have to hear that from you first. That gives us what we need to turn around and then advocate for you. And it's the same thing on the kind of statewide legislative level. They have to hear it first, and they can't only, here's a little tidbit, they can't only hear it right when they're going into session. They've got to hear it all year long at the interim committees. And you've got to be doing that kind of community building and messaging for the long term. And I know that, you know, on the public side, everything seems to probably tend to seem to move slow, but continuing to stay engaged and continuing to kind of be involved on a local, state, and federal level is like the right and the power that that members of the public have. So just, you know, keep squeaky wheel gets the grease. It's definitely true. And, you know, keep telling us what we can do and what you all are seeing, because we're only so many people, you know, we're 5 people here representing different state agencies, and we can't do it all without your help. We're kind of here to serve you all. So help us do that by, you know, talking to us about what's going on.
And I know time is of the essence, Mike, but I also want to point out one of the things that we've really been trying to do at higher ed is to think about how we asset map. There are, as Michelle was pointing out, so many beautiful things that are happening. So I can speak from my sector is go to your local higher ed page and go to their events calendar. A lot of these arts events are happening locally. And so I would invite you to check that out. Those are often publicly funded or have multi-source, you know, funding associated with them. And also for the young person who spoke earlier is I would also offer that we have dual credit classes, right? You can take classes that are paid for by the state of New Mexico to go in and start introducing yourself to the different creative writing courses, to different art courses, to different, just any course that you want to take at the introductory level to get you prepared. And many of our high school graduates in the state of New Mexico who are going into English, literature, the arts, you know, into libraries. I happen to be the proud educator of some of them, are going into college with an associate's degree so that they can do things like have dual majors. So you can study, you know, a creative field and perhaps a field that is parallel to it in terms of how we actually fund our lives. But how do I say, and I don't want to end on that note because we can also fund our lives through the arts. And so again, a both and.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, I'm really grateful to all five of you for joining us, and really grateful to Dr. Trujillo for having this idea in the first place. I'm gonna kick it off to Michelle, who had a couple last things that she wanted to say. With this is being recorded. Everyone will be able to watch it later. Speaking of events, publicly funded, there's a great music festival launching this Thursday in Albuquerque, Bueno Fest, that folks should go check out, just off the top of my head. Publicly funded, and lots of things, lots of cool collaboration. I'm gonna go run to this next panel, so I'm gonna turn it over to Michelle for the last word, and then to Dr. Trujillo to close us out as a co-host here. So thank you all. I'm going to see what happens if I can leave without breaking everything. So thank you all so much.
Bye, thank you. Thanks. I just wanted to say two quick things. One, I thought of what I wanted to say earlier, which was and I'll make it really brief. I was recently at an economic development conference kind of thing up at Buffalo Thunder for northern New Mexico, and I was sitting at a table with a woman who I was sort of talking about something I wanted to do around federal grants and how we would do what we talked about, which was get more people in New Mexico to understand about federal grants, knowing government grants are very complicated to apply for. And so how could we provide some kind of service to the public? Turns out this woman at the table runs a for-profit entity who helps defense contractors apply for federal grant money. So there are businesses that exist in that space. And I don't see why that couldn't be created in a nonprofit model or even the government model, where there is someone who is helping organizations get the work done and then managing those grants. Because when you're early in, or an individual artist, federal and state grants are a pain because there are all these rules around them. And so that was the one thing. The other thing I just wanted to say quickly was in response to what Shani was talking about. New Mexico Arts actually does fund exactly that. We have multiple organizations, educational institutions, or sometimes outside in collaboration with educational institutions, who apply for grant funding specifically to bring in professional artists or writers or musicians into schools, whether it's higher ed or K through 12, to talk about the arts, to engage with kids, either to run workshops ongoing or to do a lecture or whatever it is. So that's a model we already have. We just need more money to do more of it. So we already know how to do that. So we could so easily expand that if there was opportunity and resources available to do exactly the kinds of thing that you were talking about. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any final words from our panelists? We know that we could go on talking and talking, but we also value your time. Thank you so much for sticking with us for 15 extra minutes from our scheduled time. But also, please look at the rest of the schedule for the Creative Industries Week. There are going to be many more conversations. Many of the folks here on this panel are going to be on other panels. And so if you have questions that didn't get answered, we left our emails in the chat, but you can also join the other sessions and we'd be happy to continue the conversation. And so we're so thankful to be talking about creativity in New Mexico. And we're so thankful for all that you do. You know, I know that we probably have many artists, creatives, you know, crafters in our audience. And we thank you for your persistence and for making New Mexico beautiful. Thank you all.